So tonight on the Lovefly podcast, we welcome Liz Booker. Welcome, Liz. I've been
Thank you,
intrigued to
Paul.
hear about you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So tell us all about yourself. And I'm still very jealous of your mic setup. Your very professional podcast, so I can tell that.
Well, it was an evolution, but we'll get to some of that maybe later. I am a retired U.S. Coast Guard helicopter pilot. I'm a writer. I haven't published my own work yet, but I promote books that feature women in aviation as literary aviatrix with a website, a podcast, and a book club. And I'm all over social media, so you can follow me there.
Brilliant. Yes, I was intrigued how you came to be promoting the female just aviation, aviators, and I was broader than that in aviation at all. I was thinking, that's quite an interesting angle. But then, obviously, with having been a helicopter pilot and things, and I don't know if you still fly, but I can guess there might be a logical part to it. But I was trying to reverse engineer and think, okay, so tell us your story on this.
I can help you with all of that. And so I just want to start with some qualifications, understanding what this podcast specifically is about. And that is that I am somebody who knew I wanted to be a pilot when I was very young, like 5 years old. And I never really experienced any fear around the prospect of doing that. And that we can talk more deeply about that in a few minutes. I am not a mental health professional, so some of the suggestions that I make today may or may not be applicable to everybody's particular anxiety around flying. Yeah. I am not an airline pilot, although I know many of them, and I know very well their training programs, and so we can kind of maybe talk a little bit about that and how that might instill some confidence in somebody who is fearful to fly. And all of that said, I am somebody who has experienced fears, and we'll talk more about that. So those are my qualifications.
Yeah, that's enough for me.
And when I say qualifications, I mean, here's my box. I am a helicopter pilot. So I grew up wanting to be an astronaut, and I early on learned that you had to become a pilot first. So that kind of became my singular focus. I took some detours in my teen years and ended up enlisting in the U.S. Coast Guard. And I served as a ship navigator first and went to sea and then went to do the officer program to become a pilot. The Coast Guard sends our folks to the U.S. Navy's flight training in Pensacola. So we go through that standard military training with them. And then we come back to the Coast Guard and learn our specific aircraft. And my aircraft was the H-65 Dolphin helicopter, which is a short-range recovery aircraft for mostly search and rescue, but did many other missions as well, like law enforcement and counter-narcotics interdictions and those kinds of things.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it was a great career. I was in for 28 years. Of that, I actively flew probably 13. And then I did many other things like human resources management, and I ended my career as the senior defense official as a foreign diplomat working at the U.S. Embassy in Barbados as a liaison between the U.S. military and the chiefs of defense and police in 7 Eastern Caribbean nations.
So there's some worse places to be posted, aren't there, Liz? Just be honest.
You would be surprised. It is lovely. It's a wonderful vacation spot. It was a very busy job, surprisingly. Although I did get to spend some time on the beach drinking some rum punch, so that part was good. And while I was on active duty, I had an idea for a book. So one of the things that I did in the Coast Guard is I helped create a network for the women to connect. Because as it is the case across aviation, women make up a very small percentage of pilots. And in the Coast Guard at the time, it was 8%. For air transport qualified pilots in the U.S., it's less than 5% are women. So air transport pilots are the ones who are flying your airliners. So it's a very small percentage, and we were relatively isolated. We didn't have social media. And so that was something that was very important to me to network them because we faced unique challenges in that culture, which I'll talk about more in a few minutes. And I knew that I wanted to inspire the next generation to consider, the young ladies to consider joining us in aviation so that we could kind of move the culture forward and maybe get a critical mass. And so I had this story in mind. It was a children's story in my mind. It has kind of evolved into more of a young adult story. And so I got a Master of Fine Arts in writing for children and young adults before I retired. And then I retired in 2019, planning to write full time. And I started doing that. And then, of course, we had COVID. And I had a house full of people, and I was disconnected from the aviation community, which was what I was trying to inspire. And so I thought, well, what better way to connect with the community than to discuss books that feature women in aviation? And so I started this book club, and it was overwhelming, the response in our community. I had over 600 members in the first week and 1,200 members in the first month. And I just kind of felt like the universe was speaking to me and that I should be doing something with this. So since then, I've had the privilege of, each month I select the books for the year, and each month I have the opportunity to interview an author about their books and also about writing and publishing. And so I just have benefited from a very wonderful experience building this community around books and writing. And I was so surprised when I launched this to discover how many books there were that feature women in aviation. There are over 600 books on the market, still in print right now,
Right.
that feature women in aviation for all ages and all genres, in all types of flying. So at first I thought, oh, I might burn out on this, but truly, it's so diverse that I'm not bored yet, and I'm in the middle of year 4, so.
So what is it that keeps you going? Because this was something that's kind of occurred to you. There's a series of things have happened that led to you getting to the point.
Well, I think the reason that it's simple for me. There were aspects of my career that I missed. There are plenty of things in the military that I do not miss. Plenty of very frustrating aspects of that experience. But I loved having the opportunity to mentor and network people and build communities. That's what I like to do. And so this gives me all of those opportunities. I get the kind of camaraderie that I need. I get inspired by these stories, because these are all human stories. These are not operators' manuals about how to fly. The experience, and it's a shared experience. We all have very similar things to say, but also very different experiences as well. So it keeps the variety is amazing. And I just have, wonderful friends now out of this experience. So that keeps me going.
There's a few avenues you've offered there, Liz, which to go with her. So I'm curious about, I'm going to ask a general question then. So why do you think there's such a low percentage of females in aviation, particularly piloting?
I think there are some very influential cultural norms that we start instilling in our children very early. So,
right.
Little boys get airplanes and tanks and trucks to drive around, and little girls get dolls and maybe, I think it's evolving. Certainly in my community, I see all of these women who have children who their children have seen them come up through this route, so they have a different exposure. But I think generally the population still sees the woman as the nurturer and the man as the one who goes off and does the hunting. So I think that's really at a core of it. People say things like, well, you're away from home so much and all of these things, but so are the flight attendants, and the majority of them are women. And, there are plenty of other careers that are very demanding on time where women are in much higher numbers. So I don't believe that. And then there are the barriers once women come in. They face a culture that, has been male dominated for over a century now, and is slowly evolving. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for answering that. I ask every female pilot that I have on the podcast, because you get slightly different versions, but there is definitely a theme coming through there. So
yeah,
you don't mind me asking that, and thank you.
No, not at all.
So tell me about the helicopter pilot stuff, because I don't know if might have had one search and rescue person on,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure if that was their main thing. So I'm quite curious about that. What's that like? Because it always looks pretty terrifying when you're seeing the images of people, you doing your work. Is it like that?
Well, I was not terrified.
Oh, I know. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I know. I know people are probably thinking that. And I talk to so many people, and especially girls and women who say things like, oh, I could never do that. But yeah, you could. So I think, like I said, I was never fearful about flying as a child. I would get on an airliner and I would just be exhilarated with the takeoff and the landing. And those things were exciting to me. So nobody gets credit for that, I don't think, but me. I mean, my parents were not in aviation. They were encouraging, though. They exposed me as much as they could. But I just had this passion for it from an early age. And then when I actually got to do it, I was in a very demanding military competitive program. And my fears there were really more around failing and not being able to perform really well, rather than and not being able to fulfill my dream, rather than around anything that could happen in the aircraft. And so I trained on fixed wing aircraft first, and then transitioned to helicopters, the Bell 206 in Pensacola, and then to the H-65, like I mentioned, where we learned our particular operations and all the bells and whistles that our aircraft has, which are pretty cool. We had a lot of really great navigation instruments on board. We flew with a crew of 4, typically 2 pilots, a flight mechanic, and the flight mechanics are people who actually work on our aircraft and then go flying with us. So we call that high quality control on the maintenance side.
Yeah.
But they also, when we're airborne, they back us up as pilots by monitoring what we're doing. And then they operate that hoist cable that hangs out the door. And then typically having an aviation survival technician or a rescue swimmer as our 4th crew member. And so the demanding operations that we did, I would consider, would be when we were in a hover over water. So we typically hovered if we were going to operate with a boat or do a rescue. We would be hovering around 30 feet, was our standard over the water. And we also landed on the backs of Coast Guard cutters. And some of those are very small in comparison to, for instance, your Royal Air, what are the auxiliary boats that you have? The remind me the name?
Yeah, the aircraft carrier. Those the big.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely smaller than those too. Yeah. So I think where, I obviously had a healthy respect for the operations that we were doing, and the fact that we were operating an aircraft that had 2 engines, and it was fine to hover in most conditions with 2 engines. But if we lost an engine, in a lot of scenarios, we were not going to be able to maintain that hover. And so that could be a terrifying thing, but we routinely practice the procedures for how to react to that situation. And we just built this muscle memory of how to either get the aircraft into forward flight, hopefully that's the outcome that you would achieve. But then we were also very well trained to exit the aircraft if it was upside down in the water at night with no visibility. So I think any fears that I experienced around those operations were mitigated by the knowledge that I had and the training that I had and the muscle memory that I trusted. And I also felt fairly confident in my judgment to not get myself into a situation where I would need to use my superior flying skills to get out of a situation. So, yeah.
I mean, there's a few messages in there in terms of just dealing with fear generally, isn't there? So,
yeah.
Well, I'd kind of like to tap into that. What do you think we would be helpful? Most of the people who listen to this podcast will be nervous flyers or ex-nervous flyers.
Right.
But the net is kind of a bit wider now, and people just are stumbling onto it because they're interested in the path. What do you think What would you like to share with us? Do you think that would be helpful to our hearers?
Well, let me just start with my own fear. And this is probably going to surprise a lot of people, but I had a fear from early childhood and even still of the ocean, and mostly of the critters in the ocean that are going to eat me alive. And they are there. The likelihood, obviously, of that happening, even just out at the beach, is pretty low. But I'm still someone who is not comfortable swimming in murky water. If I can't see what's going on, that freaks me out. Yeah. And so and to compound those fears, I spent all of these years doing search and rescue cases of people who got themselves into hard situations in the water. Many of them divers who, for whatever reason, got themselves into trouble. And so diving was a thing that I would never, ever have done. I mean, I was terrified even of snorkeling on a reef, and I was able to get through that. But I eventually I was able to do it. And here's what it was for me. So the scariest thing I ever did in sort of that context was I was stationed at a unit in Port Angeles, Washington, which is in the Northwest Pacific coast of the United States on the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And these are the orca grounds. These are where the orcas live and travel. My husband worked on a boat that went to go do whale watching tours. And the unit I was at, it was before I was a pilot. It was an air station. And the way that they practice sometimes for the rescue swimmers is they have somebody go out and be like a live pretend victim, and they call them a duck. And so I got qualified as a duck in Port Angeles and was lowered into this murky water where I know orcas live, and I'm in a giant orange, we call them Gumby suits because the water temperature is very cold there. And I'm just like left in the water as the helicopter backs up to prepare the rescue swimmer to put down the hoist to come and get me. And let me tell you, that was definitely the scariest thing I have ever done. And I'm glad I could say that I could do it. I'm glad I did it because it gave me a very deep empathy for the people in the water that I went out later to help. And so I could never do that job for a living, and even to this day. But fast forward now, I'm at the end of my career. I'm living in Barbados, and I the first flight that I took out of Miami, I flew up and down the coast, and not to terrify anybody about the water here, but I am here to tell you that there is a beach line that goes up the entire east coast of Florida. And we took off and dropped down to 300 feet and did our normal patrol up the coast. And there's the shallow part of the water where all the people are. And then there's a drop off, and there were hundreds of sharks. This is on my first flight. And so I've seen them from the air. And so I don't want to get in the water with those things. I do go to the beach. I will say that, and I'll stay in the shallow end. But I was terrified to do that kind of thing. But when I was in Barbados, I was told, and I believed, that there were no sharks in the water there. They just don't live particularly on the west side of Barbados. And so I got certified to dive there, and it opened up a whole new world for me. It's like the world was flipped upside down, and I got to see an underworld that I never would have experienced. And so that's a very special memory to me. And I'm glad that I did it, but you won't see me diving here in Florida.
But
the difference for me is, and how I kind of like work through that rationally, is that when I'm in the aircraft, I have a certain sense of control over the environment.
Yeah.
I can't control everything, but Mother Nature isn't out there trying to smack me out of the air. I can see storms, so I can avoid them if I use my good judgment. Yeah. The aircraft has plenty of things that could go wrong with it, but I was trained to deal with most of those things. And so I feel like having some confidence around my understanding and my knowledge and my training and my experience and my judgment, it gives me a sense of confidence to do it. Whereas in the water, I feel less in control. And I feel like, I listened to a few of your episodes, and I loved the one where you had the guy on and this other, she was an airline pilot, and then this guy who created these cards for passengers to look at. I don't know that that's right for everyone, but it sounded to me like the kind of thing that would help allay a lot of anxiety if you understand what's going on and why. I know he talked about like the hydraulic noises that happen at the beginning of the aircraft that, if you don't know what something is, it can be terrifying. But, and she said, but I love that sound. It makes everything that is working the way it's supposed to. So, so thinking about what I do now and your audience, what I thought might be useful would, for certain people, would be the opportunity to maybe read some stories that would help them have better, deeper insight into the training that pilots go through, some of the emergencies that they encounter and how they deal with them and how they are trained to deal with them. That might be useful to some of your listeners. Yeah.
Good idea. Because I think when I listen to you talking about just the thought of diving, I always find that quite fear-provoking because feels quite claustrophobic, and you feel you're literally in an environment you can't exist in. And that's something to overcome, isn't it?
Yeah, and even though you're trained in the procedures about what to do, like if that oxygen tank, like something happens to that, that was really scary. You're at the mercy of the environment. So, which is true too at high altitudes. But again, we mitigate that with a variety of safety precautions and then procedures to deal with it. So, yeah.
So, okay. So tell us some of your recommendations, and that sounds great.
Okay, I have 2 primary recommendations, and then I will launch you in whatever direction you want to go. The first and foremost, I think anybody with any anxiety, period, and any anxiety around flying especially, should consider this book. It's called Flying Free. It's by Cecilia Aragon, and the subtitle is My Victory Over Fear to Become the First Latina Pilot on the U.S. Aerobatic Team. And it is wonderful for somebody who is afraid of.
Again, let's have another.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm not going to tell you all about this book. Cecilia does it so well in her own words. I have interviewed her, so you can go to the Literary Aviatrix website and listen to that. But I would also offer that she would be a wonderful guest. We talked about her book, we talked about her stuff, but I think she could craft her conversation with you very specifically about overcoming fear. She was afraid to fly. She was afraid to fly. She likes to say, afraid to even get in the elevator. She would take the stairs. And so she kind of forced herself through this exercise. And she is a very accomplished woman beyond just aerobatic flying.
Okay.
And part of that was overcoming a fear like that to have the confidence to do other things in life. And so that's one that I definitely suggest.
Number one, a potential guest as well, by the sound of it.
Yes, for sure. The other one, I don't have a copy of it with me. I'm sorry. I won't hold it up, but you may have heard of it. It's called Nerves of Steel by Tammy Jo Schultz. Tammy Jo, and I don't have all of the exact details, but Tammy Jo was a Navy trained. She performed unusual attitudes, like taught students how to recover from all kinds of crazy stuff that could happen in a high performance jet. And so she left the military and went to the airlines, and she was the captain on a flight that had a catastrophic engine failure and lost a piece of the engine into the skin of the aircraft. She was able to land that aircraft and handle that emergency as the culmination of all of her training and experience that led to that moment, and save almost all the people. There was one person who was sucked out of that hole in the skin of the aircraft. So when I recommend that one, it is with caution, that may be triggering for people who are fearful.
Yeah.
It might not be the right one, but like, let's also remember how infrequent something like that can happen. Yeah. And it did, and she was able to overcome that and save all those people because of her training and experience. So that might be something that helps people. You're gonna have to know yourself. Like, your listeners are gonna have to know themselves. I would say the rest of the canon of books, like I said, is in all genres. We've got fiction, mystery, romance, all that stuff. We've got lots of incredible historic stuff and memoirs. I would offer that the majority of our books deal quite a bit with the experience of being a female in a male-dominated field and sort of the obstacles that we have to overcome around that. But they also obviously teach you through their writing about what kind of training those pilots experience and and most of them talk about some kind of an emergency that they encountered during their flying careers, no matter what kind of flying they're doing. And so you can kind of see how they dealt with that and then how they overcame it. So
it sounds like your resource that you do, the literary, I'm not sure I'm going to get this out, literary Aviatrix. Is that right?
You would say aviator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just one of the feminine versions of saying that, aviatrix.
Aviatrix. Got it. Yeah. So people who like to sort of geek out on aviation books, they're going to love it anyway. But then you've also, if you've collated all the ones which are involved with female aviatrix, I think that's fabulous. So and I know there will be some listeners who definitely.
Oh, and history, man! If you don't know all the women who were flying during World War II, go check that out, because UK had the air transport auxiliary pilots. The women in the US were ferrying aircraft in the same way. Sure. The women Air Force service pilots. Yeah. But the Russians had the Night Witches, who were the only fighter pilots during World War II. And several, Nazi Germany, there's an excellent book by Brit Claire Mully, about a couple of women who flew for Hitler during World War II. And it's a fascinating read. So there's just if you like to read, you'll find something to read on the website. And then if you're fearful about flying, you'll have to take your own temperature on how much drama around flying you can handle.
Yes.
But obviously, the majority of the protagonists survive their flights. So
that's really good. And that's really interesting, because that's just, you're the sort of guest that I love comes on this, because it just bring in a whole nother angle that I haven't even thought about. Hands up, I haven't even thought about all that. And to bring it all together in one place, you're going to have something, they're going to love that.
I hope so. I hope so.
So what about you then? You mentioned that you've had to overcome quite a lot of your fears, and you say you put it down to the training and, just the repetition and stuff, but with their sort of mental strategies that you've used, because some of the things you've described were terrifying most normal people.
Okay, so I will.
You know what I mean?
I will share one crazy thing that I did, and kind of how I mentally prepared for it. But my military life obviously helped me, because I had done so much sort of learning procedures and emergency procedures and repetition, so that I was pilots like to talk about compartmentalizing. You don't, if you have kids that are like a mess at home and you have to go to work, you've got to kind of turn that part of your brain off.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I think I'm able to do in a stressful situation, is turn my fear off. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But and I don't know how do you develop that skill outside of the military and being in high intensity situations. But I had this fantasy to go do wing walking, to climb out of an aircraft while it was flying and climb
into the wing.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's enough for me. I'm with us. Okay.
And so I wouldn't say I was excited about that. I mean, certainly, like, the possibilities of things that could go wrong, obviously, from my perspective, increased exponentially being outside the plane. But I wanted to do it. I just had this thing that I wanted to do that. And so I did this actually near that place that I said earlier out in Washington State. They're no longer in operations right now, but where you could go and they'd take you up. And so it was like an hour or two drive to get out there from where I was staying. And the whole way I just was like kind of pushing my fears aside. And my plan was to focus on whatever procedures I was taught. And that's what I did. I got there and the pilot showed me this aircraft I think it was a Stinson, which is an old biplane with fabric wings. And so you have to be very careful where you step on this aircraft or you're going to poke a hole in the wing. And so there was this very set procedure, that very specific places to put my toes and my hands, and a like step by step, this is how you're going to climb up on top of this wing while we're in flight. And so I practiced that. I repeated it maybe 6 or 7 times and got that procedure in my head. And so when we got up there, the thing that surprised me the most was the wind, because I never parachuted. And I think probably if you've jumped out of an aircraft, you probably experienced that wind in your face in the same way. That was unpleasant to me, and that was the least pleasant thing. And I was a little jittery. I will confess, a little jittery climbing up, but I followed the procedures. I got up there. He did aerobatics with me, strapped to the top of the plane. And then the next step of that was for me to climb to the bottom wing and like ride out on a strut out on the bottom, like between the two wings. And he did like a barrel roll with me out there. And I was like, I'm done. I'm going to get off the ride now. I did it. I've got the video to prove it. And now I am done. So.
Would you do it again?
No. Nope. No, I did that.
That was a test.
Yeah, no, I was good.
Do you know what? As you described that, I was getting butterflies.
You can go watch the video. It's on my YouTube channel.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. You're right, laugh. Yeah.
Oh, there was something about that, though, that I wanted to come back to. I can't remember what it is.
You're talking about what you did with the fear, like how you...
Yeah, the compartmentalizing, something about that. It'll come back to me, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's going to take a moment.
You need a shot of vodka or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's say something. I know. I'm sure that you've talked about this plenty on the podcast. But one of the things that I noticed that most people, including my own children, get a little afraid of is turbulence.
Yeah.
In a plane. Yeah. And so, again, I'm not an airline pilot, so I can't speak to the capabilities of the planes or their limitations about entering that kind of turbulence. But the way that I get my children through this is we lived in Barbados, and the main roads are lovely, like the highways are, but most of the other roads on Barbados are in severe disrepair. And I owned a locally bought Suzuki little sort of kind of a cheap little SUV. I barely even call it an SUV. but we also imported a Jeep, like a proper, like old fashioned, open air Jeep with big tires and everything. And so if I was driving down the road and I knew it was bumpy in the Suzuki, I was going to go slow, and because I knew I was going to damage the undercarriage of the car. But if I was in the Jeep, it might be a little uncomfortable for everybody, but we could go a little bit faster, and you kind of know what the difference is with the machine that you're operating and the environment that it is. I tell people that, turbulence is a lot like potholes in the road. The aircraft is going to ride them the same way a car would ride on that road. In my helicopter, if we encountered turbulence, we had an operating speed to slow back to so that we didn't stress different parts of the aircraft, and we would manage it around that. And if we were in severe turbulence, we would, get out of that. And so I trust, in the same way that I knew that about my aircraft, that airline pilots, obviously, you'll hear them say, we're looking for a better altitude. They'll call air traffic control because they have pilot reports at various altitudes to know what the conditions are like. And they'll do their best to make the ride as smooth as possible. But, it's just the bus going over the potholes. That's it.
Nice.
I don't know if that helps anyone.
Yeah, that'll definitely help people. I like the thing with the different tires that you've got and the re-emphasizing the slowing down. That's exactly what our pilots talk about. They don't quite talk about it like that, but that's a nice twist on the story. That's very good.
Yeah.
So what next for you then? You've got this.
Oh, this is it. You asked if I fly now. I fly okay, so this is fun. I fly recreationally. I have done a couple of things. I got to fly. I flew aerobatics as part of our military training, but I hadn't done it in many, many years. And I had this poster on my wall as a teenager of a very accomplished female aerobatic pilot. Her name is Patty Wagstaff, and she's pretty well known in the aviation circles here in the U.S. And she runs a flight school up in St. Augustine. And so I had the privilege of going and taking a course with her and getting to fly with her. So this is like my teenage heroine. And I got to actually fly in an aircraft with her and do some aerobatics, which I hadn't done in a long time. But for the most part, my flying now, because so here's what I never had to do, and another barrier to entry for everyone, and I think, and also in particular for women, is just the cost of training and of flying. It's very expensive to become a pilot. And so to fly now with my particular life situation, it doesn't make sense for me to live next to an airport or own an aircraft. Those are life goals, but I'm not there yet. So I go gliding with a friend. So now I operate an aircraft without an engine, which is a really amazing experience and very confidence building, because you get towed up by another plane and then you let go the rope, and now you are at the mercy of the elements. And so whereas that turbulence before may have been, a problem for an aircraft trying to fly through it, in this scenario, it might be an indication that there is lift being created by the heat rising from the earth. So many things are like kind of turned on their heads. I always used to say that as a helicopter pilot, I felt pretty in touch with the environment. Like I could be flying along a coastline and look down at the water, because we obviously flew fairly close to the water. And I could see ahead of us, we call them cat's paws, if there were like puffs of white on the water, we were probably going to encounter a downdraft that was creating those. So we would, plan ahead and slow our speed for turbulence. Now, and then my analogy that I was trying to get to is that flying gliders is like the difference between a small craft with an engine and a sailor. Like I feel like sailors are very attuned to the environment and the conditions. And I suspected that was true of glider pilots, and I have since discovered that it is. So now I look at clouds in the sky, and I look up to see if they're getting puffier at the top, because if they are, that means that probably heat is rising underneath them to create that lift. And so we get under that cloud and just ride that thermal up. and also where I used to avoid birds. Because if you hit a bird in a helicopter, you're going to need to find somewhere to land, and because that's an emergency procedure. But now I chase them, because when you see those birds circling up and just soaring in circles and climbing, they are riding the lift, and we do that, and it's amazing. It's an incredible experience, and it's also very confidence building, because all pilots practice engine out procedures, but now every landing is an engine out landing.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
we're really, you have to really have good judgment and good piloting skills. And so I really love it. So that's what I do for my flying anyway. Yeah.
I love that.
I have an endless list of aviation goals, though. It would take us hours to go through them all. There's some really fun stuff out there that I want to do.
Well, okay. So I'm going to ask you to sort of name check all your places that people can find you in the set, but I just have this image of chasing birds. Aha! Look at them.
That's so great.
It makes
Yeah.
perfect sense, so doesn't it? Because they've sussed it out. So you're thinking, oh, right, I'll go follow them lot.
Yeah. If you get, those of you who are on TikTok, you can go watch those videos on TikTok.
Okay, right. So Liz, tell us how we find you, what people need to do. Give us all the links and where you are, and because I think this is a really interesting one, and we've got some real wannabe plane geeks in our group now, and
Oh, good.
just love the peripheral stuff, and like experts in other fields. So that's where you sit very nice.
That's great.
Yes.
Well, literary aviatrix.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah. So I'm on TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram. Instagram is probably where I'm most active. And Facebook. The Aviatrix Book Club itself is on Facebook. So it's like a group on Facebook.
Right.
I also have the Aviatrix Writers Group. So if there are any women out there writing books that feature aviation in them, or any men whose protagonists are women in aviation, no matter what field, not just pilots. We want more maintenance and everything, engineers and everything. So please join us in the Aviatrix Writers Group. And then you can go listen to my podcast. If you go to my website, you'll see you can shop for books. You can listen to my interviews and find everything there.
Awesome. What an interesting guest you've been. That's been fascinating.
Well, I hope that some of it's helpful, and I do hope that some of these books resonate with even people who have anxiety around flying. And we'll get you in touch with Cecilia Aragon. She'll be a great guest.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you. Oh, well, thank you, Liz. An absolute pleasure to meet you, and it's been a really interesting. I mean, I will probably have nightmares tonight about you flying out onto the wing.
Oh, that did it. You triggered what I was trying to say.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. Okay.
Oh, the closing.
Yes. No, sorry to drag this on, but just this one little part. And I've talked to other pilots and veterans who express this too. Very interestingly, I never had nightmares or anything about the work that I was doing while I was in active duty and operational. It was not until I retired that I started to have dreams about being under the water at night, upside down in my aircraft, and having to get myself and get my crew out. And also power lines. Power lines for me were very stressful because we're flying low altitude. So now I have nightmares about being like surrounded by power lines and I can't figure out how to fly out of them. So I suppressed that anxiety and I compartmentalized it. And so it was there, but obviously I was able to overcome it to do something that I was very passionate about. So I hope to all of you who have fears or anxiety around flying that you can find peace with it, so that you can have the freedom and flexibility to enjoy the wonderful opportunities that being able to fly brings you. I mean, I get to fly. I'm going to go fly over to Europe this summer with my son. I'm going to be doing 30 days all over Europe and lots of flying from A to B to do that. And I wouldn't be able to do that if we were terrified of flying. So I hope to all of you that you're able to overcome it.
Brilliant. Oh, that's a great ending. Good ending. Well done.
Glad I remembered that.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And oh yeah, I'll let you know when it's out. But that's been really interesting. Thank you.
Good. I hope so. I hope it's helpful. And seriously, I will get you in touch with Cecilia. She'll be a great guest. And if you want to check her out ahead of time, you can listen to my interview with her.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Where are you? Where are you located?
Oh, we're over near London, UK.
Where?
Kent. Do you know it?
Kent, is it? So I will be in Oxford on July 5th, meeting a bunch of these women pilots that are in my book club and maybe a couple of the authors. I don't know if you're near Oxford.
I'm not far away. Yeah, I'll be welcome. I'm not a woman. Is that okay?
It's absolutely okay.
Okay.
I'll send you an invitation if you feel like coming out and meeting us. Then you might get some more material. There's one wonderful woman who is she flies for British Airways, who's going to meet us up. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'd love to. Yeah, we'll definitely. That sounds like that's a date.
All right, that sounds awesome. Okay, thanks, Paul. I look forward to hearing this. Bye.